as you mentioned, we have conflicts around the world today, from the Ukraine to Gaza, um, conflicts that continues to arise and visit new elements that previous generations have not encountered in terms of threats on the battlefield. How has the ROTC program really adapted over time? And in recent years, do you feel to prepare the cadets for these modern threats, such as cyber warfare, UAS, which are unmanned aerial systems, drones, for example, as well as we've seen in Gaza, subterranean tactics.
Yeah, I think what it offers. So I had the opportunity, as you mentioned in the opening. I recently moved from Germany, where I commanded a theater air and missile defense command. So I really looked at the unmanned aerial system problem that is going on there in that conflict, more so than I've looked at the subterranean threat and things that are going on in Gaza, with two very different different problem sets. I'd first offer you that that's not necessarily the role of Cadet Command and ROTC. So
Mm,
we're really trying to get at the basics of of officership and not
mhm,
overwhelm them with really hard tactical or strategic problems. I think
mm,
that comes later through their next phase of military education, and quite frankly, it's more suited for what the general force does, how they educate and do on the job training out in the force. If you set that aside, what I would offer you is that the things that I hear taught and talked about in our ROTC curriculum today far outpaces what I got as a cadet. We weren't talking about um, uh, UAS or drone warfare. We may have just started to talk about subterranean things, because that's not
mm.
necessarily
Technologically.
a new thing. We think it is, but in terms of some of the stuff we were seeing maybe 20, 30 years ago, we were thinking like that. Uh, but they're talking about things like multi-domain operations, right? How do we take all of those things, space, air, land, sea, combine capabilities and really get out creating effects across the battle space. That wasn't something that I got as a cadet in senior ROTC. That our cadets are having conversations. I recently visited a program, and I literally had cadets. They read my bio. They knew I had just come from Germany,
Hmm.
and they had teed up all of these space questions. They were literally asking me about satellites in orbit and how do we leverage those capabilities. These are like sophomores, juniors, and seniors in
Incredible.
college asking questions about space operations, right? And we're preparing them to do small unit tactical stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it's very applicable, and I say that to say that I think this generation's thoughts and where their focus is. And some of that has to do with media, more readily available information that they have now at the palm of their hand to really understand what's going on, and things like SpaceX and some of the technology is just more readily available than uh, for my generation when I was at this point in same point in my career that they are. So I think they are getting those things, but that's not necessarily our purpose. Our purpose is to give them those foundational
Hmm.
technical tactical leadership skills, introduce them to some very basic warfighting concepts that prepare them for their next level of education at their basic officer leadership course that every officer goes to. And they're anywhere from a few months to, in some cases, a year for our aviation officers who will spend that in flight school, quite frankly. But they have some standard curriculum, and then they start to really build on their specific job that they'll do in the Army. For me, as a young lieutenant, that was as an air defense officer at the time at Fort Bliss, Texas, and we really talked about the different weapon systems. And then that became a different learning environment when I got to my first unit of assignment. But it was those foundational skills, just the basic things that we do in United States Army Cadet Command that prepared me for all of those other things. So it's the foundational growth on that foundation that ROTC really lays for each one of those cadets. And then as they matriculate as commissioned officers, we continue to build on that. But they are having those conversations about some very, what I would classify as wicked problems when you look at things that are going on in Ukraine and the things that are going on in Gaza right now. And this is from an army that came out of, fighting some pretty small, not large combat wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq, right? When you think
Hmm.
about fighting a counterinsurgency fight, and
Right.
now we're transitioning to large scale combat operations.
Once
Uh,
again, which
Once
we haven't
again,
seen in a
right?
generation.
Yeah, which we haven't. You said in a generation. That's what I grew up on. Looking at old Soviet doctrine was the foundation of what I got as a young officer, and now we still have some counterinsurgency operations going on around the world. Think about Africa and some of the things that happen there, other places in the Middle East, and now we have this somewhat large land fight going on in Eastern Europe.
Yep.
And then we have a pretty significant fight going on, in Gaza in the Middle East, that poses some different problems for, I think, this generation of young officers in terms of perhaps the dexterity they will have to have as young officers to be able to understand and go from large scale combat operations to really small, maybe counterinsurgency operations in the span of their 3 or 4 years,
Right.
initial 3 or 4 years in the Army. Think about that. And we're
Yep.
trying to give them that. So we put them in all types of situations that create ambiguity for them, that really stress them, that help them become more resilient. And that's all done in the senior ROTC program through a host of things. I think one of the things that perhaps Cadet Command does better than any other leadership training program, and you'll get this at the United States Military Academy at West Point,
Hmm.
very similar mission set. Not only do you learn the theory of leadership, we put you in real scenarios that allow you to test those on a regular basis in field training exercises. And then we bring you to a crucible event between your junior and senior year or the year before you actually commission that summer. And we put you in a crucible and really test you and stress your leadership skills. I think one of the toughest jobs you will ever have in the Army isn't leading subordinates, is leading peers. And you
Absolutely.
get to do that in that summer training environment where you get that crucible event that really tests, challenges you, shows you, exposes you to your leadership flaws, the places that you probably need the most growth. And I think that's one of the unique things that United States Army Cadet Command, through our leadership training model, both classroom and theory wise, but most importantly, you get the opportunity to practice those things in real time in some very exquisite scenarios that will test you.